let's look into the life and poetic journey of Ted Hughes, one of the most powerful and original voices of modern English poetry. Born in Yorkshire, England in 1930, Hughes became famous for his vivid portrayals of the natural world, but not nature in its gentle or romantic form. His poems often explore the raw instincts, savagery, and primal energy of animals and humans alike. At Cambridge University, he studied anthropology and folklore, fields that later shaped the mythical and symbolic quality of his verse. His interest in ancient rituals and animal archetypes gave his poetry an almost ritualistic intensity, as if every poem were a reenactment of creation itself. In 1956, Hughes married the brilliant American poet Sylvia Plath, and that marriage year has been asked in exam. Together, they became one of the most famous and tragic literary couples of the 20th century. The next year, in 1957, they moved to the United States, a fact that has also been tested in exam. That same year saw the publication of Hughes's first poetry collection, The Hawk in the Rain, another detail that has been asked in exam. This debut was immediately recognized for its powerful rhythms and elemental imagery. It marked the arrival of a poet whose world was dominated by hawks, foxes, pikes, crows, and jaguars, creatures that became symbols of instinct, violence, and survival. Hughes followed his success with Lupercal in 1960 and Selected Poems in 1962, both significant milestones in his career, and yes, those titles have been asked in exam. Around this time, he also collaborated with poet Tom Gunn, and their work together signaled a fresh postmodern energy in English verse, a collaboration that's been mentioned in exam as well. Tragedy struck in 1963 when Sylvia Plath took her own life, an event that deeply affected Hughes and temporarily silenced his poetic voice. When he eventually returned to writing, his poetry had grown darker and more symbolic. What Woe in 1967 and Crow in 1970 revealed a new mythic intensity. Both collections have been cited in exam. In Crow, for example, Hughes reimagined a trickster figure who moves between creation and chaos, a brutal yet strangely divine being. Hughes also explored myth and memory in Wolf Watching, 1989, and New Selected Poems, 1995. But perhaps his most intimate work came at the very end of his life, Birthday Letters, published in 1998, a deeply emotional sequence addressed to Sylvia Plath. This book won multiple awards and has been mentioned in exam for its candor and tragic beauty. Beyond poetry, Hughes was a versatile writer. He created remarkable works for children, including The Iron Man in 1968, a story that became a modern classic and a popular animated adaptation. This children's book has also been tested in exam. He collaborated on Remains of Elmet in 1979, blending poetry and photography to depict the haunting landscapes of his native Yorkshire. Hughes's talents weren't limited to poetry and fiction. He translated plays like Seneca's Oedipus in 1968, adapted works for opera such as The Story of Vasco, and co-edited The Rattlebag in 1982 with his close friend Seamus Heaney, an anthology that became a staple in schools and universities. In 1984, Hughes was appointed Britain's Poet Laureate, a role that confirmed his standing as one of the most significant English poets of his time. His later years were marked by constant creativity, editing, translating, and compiling anthologies that celebrated poetry's vitality. His letters were posthumously published in 2007, and a later collection, a Ted Hughes bestiary, appeared in 2014, reaffirming his lifelong fascination with the animal world. Ted Hughes passed away in 1998, but his influence continues to shape both contemporary poetry and literary thought. His verse confronts the primitive forces of life, birth, death, violence, and transformation with a voice both majestic and unsettling. In short, Hughes's poetry invites readers to look beyond civilization's surface and into the deeper, elemental truths of existence. His work stands as a reminder that poetry can still roar, still bite, and still sing the song of the wild. Let's explore the rich and powerful world of Ted Hughes, one of the most commanding poetic voices of the 20th century. Hughes's works combine myth, nature, violence, and psychology into an elemental vision of life itself. His poetry often feels raw, physical, and deeply spiritual, a force of nature on paper. Hughes made his debut in 1957 with his first collection, The Hawk in the Rain, and that very title has been asked in exam. The collection immediately established his reputation for vivid animal imagery and fierce, muscular language. 2 years later came Lupercal, published in 1960, which further strengthened his poetic identity, and this title too has appeared in exam. By 1967, Hughes released Wadwo, a collection exploring myth and transformation inspired by the wild man of medieval legend. This again has been asked in exam, so keep it noted. Then came one of his most striking and controversial works, From the Life and the Songs of the Crow, published in 1970. This dark, mythic sequence reflects humanity's fall from grace through the perspective of a mockingbird-like creature. That title has also been tested in exam and often represents a turning point in Hughes's career where he abandoned realism for mythic abstraction. Over the years, Hughes published numerous other works, Selected Poems in 1972, Cave Birds in 1975, and Gaudete in 1977, a strange, visionary narrative in verse. In 1979, he brought out two remarkable books, Remains of Elmet, with haunting photographs by Faye Godwin, and Moortown, which captured rural life and the harsh beauty of farming landscapes. Later came River in 1983, Flowers and Insects in 1986, and Wolf Watching in 1989. Hughes continued to evolve, moving between ecological awareness and mythic imagination. His later works include Rain Charm for the Duchy in 1992 and New Selected Poems in 1994, which showcased his development over nearly 4 decades. In 1997, Hughes published Tales from Ovid, retelling the myths of transformation with raw intensity. And finally, in 1998, just before his death, came Birthday Letters, a deeply personal collection reflecting on his relationship with Sylvia Plath. It remains one of his most moving and confessional works, closing the circle of his poetic journey. Now, let's turn to some of Hughes's most famous individual poems, many of which are frequently asked in exam. His early masterpiece, The Thought Fox, is one such poem. It portrays the creative process through the image of a fox entering the poet's imagination, and that poem's title has been asked in exam. Then there's Pike, another exam favorite, where Hughes captures the violent grace of nature in the image of a deadly fish gliding through dark water. Similarly, Hawk Roosting, also tested in exam, is written from the perspective of a predatory bird, a symbol of power, instinct, and control. From his crow sequence comes Crow's Fall, again asked in exam, a powerful myth of rebellion and renewal. Another iconic piece is The Jaguar, often quoted for its unforgettable line describing the animal's energy, the world rolls under the long thrust of his heel. This poem, too, has been tested in exam. You'll also encounter Wind, a poem brimming with elemental force, portraying nature's wild energy battering a house, and yes, this one has also appeared in exam. Other notable poems include View of a Pig, Snowdrop, Full Moon, and Little Frida, February 17th, Examination at the Womb Door, and Love Song, each one blending tenderness with the raw intensity of nature and human emotion. And don't forget Thrushes, another poem that has been asked in exam. It celebrates the ruthless precision of natural instinct. Similarly, Wadwo, the title poem of his 1967 collection, and Lupercal from his earlier phase have both been tested in exam contexts. Finally, there's his touching poem Daffodils, which begins with the line, "Remember how we picked the daffodils?" This poem reflects on memory, loss, and shared love, and this opening line too has been asked in exam. Through all these works, Ted Hughes built a poetic universe alive with animals, myths, and elemental forces. His poetry challenges us to see the world not as something gentle and distant, but as fierce, alive, and deeply interconnected. So, if you ever find his name in exam, and you certainly will remember, Ted Hughes stands as a great naturalist of the spirit, the poet who gave voice to both the predator and the poet within us. Let's step into the elemental and fiercely vivid world of Ted Hughes, beginning with his remarkable debut collection, The Hawk in the Rain. Published in 1957 by Faber and Faber, this volume introduced a poet of immense energy and primal imagination. It contains 40 poems, and this very fact has been asked in exam. Hughes's first book quickly established his reputation and even won the Galbraith Prize, an early recognition of his raw, untamed poetic power. That prize detail, too, has appeared in exam. The entire collection is dedicated to Sylvia Plath, Hughes's first wife, and that dedication has also been noted in exam. The poems here are charged with a deep fascination for nature, especially the animal world, where every creature seems to carry both symbolic and real significance. Many poems explore the fragile boundary between human and non-human life, between instinct and intellect, between control and chaos. The central theme of the title poem, The Hawk in the Rain, is the struggle of human fragility against nature's immense power, a theme that has been tested in exam. In this poem, Hughes contrasts a man weighed down by mud and storm with a hawk soaring effortlessly above him, a vivid symbol of strength, freedom, and primal energy. Remember, the symbolism of the hawk itself has been asked in exam. The human speaker trudges through the drumming ploughland, his feet trapped by the swallowing of the earth's mouth, lines that have been cited in exam for their imagery of exhaustion and resistance. Meanwhile, the hawk, effortlessly at height, hangs his still eye. A line that has also been mentioned in exam shows the bird suspended in absolute command, untouched by gravity or weather. Hughes's imagery here is visceral and elemental. Rain lashes, wind batters, mud clings, and through it all the hawk remains steady, poised, and eternal. The contrast couldn't be clearer. Man struggles, but the hawk soars with effortless control. This idea of human struggle, the weight of gravity and limitation, has also been referred to in exam. The hawk, in Hughes's vision, embodies what he called the angel of vitality. It is a creature of will, instinct, and grace, the living emblem of nature's indifference, yet its perfection. Its diamond eye watches the chaos below, and even when the poem ends with that eye smashed and mixed with the mire of the land, a haunting image that has appeared in exam, the hawk still stands as a symbol of endurance, of life's brutal dignity. Hughes's tone throughout the poem mixes awe and fear, reminding us that nature's power is both beautiful and merciless. His father's survival of Gallipoli during the First World War adds another layer to this poem, the endurance of the human body and spirit against overwhelming force. In style, Hughes's language is muscular, charged with sound and rhythm. His lines are dense, tactile, and intensely visual, full of mud, rain, and bone. Every phrase seems to echo the beating of wings and the pounding of the earth. With The Hawk in the Rain, Ted Hughes announced his lifelong obsession, exploring the raw, untamed forces of nature and the place of human beings within them. The poem doesn't simply describe the natural world, it thrusts us into it, letting us feel the wind, the pain, and the fierce beauty of survival. So when you come across The Hawk in the Rain in exam, remember this. It's not just a poem about a bird. It's about the eternal tension between human limitation and natural supremacy, between struggle and grace, between the mud and the sky. Let's step quietly into the midnight forest of imagination, where Ted Hughes, one of the most powerful voices of post-war poetry, brings inspiration itself to life in his poem, The Thought Fox. Hughes was born in Yorkshire, the rugged English countryside that shaped much of his poetic vision, and this detail has been asked in exam. His father had fought with the Lancashire Fusiliers, another fact mentioned in exam. That family connection to nature and war gave Hughes's poetry its distinctive depth, a mix of the wild, the mystical, and the human. Before becoming one of Britain's leading poets, Hughes even worked at a zoo, which explains his lifelong fascination with animals. They appear again and again in his poems not just as creatures, but as symbols of primal instinct and untamed creativity. While the movement poets of the 1950 seconds were writing in a plain, humanistic style, Hughes went the other way, delving into mysticism, myth, and the unknown. He once said about his generation of writers, "Now I came a bit later, and that line has been asked in exam." He also remarked, "I hadn't had enough." I was all for opening negotiations, meaning he wanted poetry to face the darkness of the modern world, including the trauma of war, the death camps, and the atomic bomb. Now, the Thought Fox beautifully captures that struggle between stillness and sudden inspiration. The poem begins with a quiet moment. "I imagine this midnight moment's forest." That opening line has been asked in exam. The poet sits before a blank page at midnight, feeling the loneliness of the clock and the absence of stars, both symbols of creative emptiness. These lines too have been quoted in exam. Something else is alive beside the clock's loneliness and this blank page where my fingers move. Then something stirs a fox, moving delicately through the darkness, its nose touching the twigs and leaves. The animal moves cautiously at first, neat prints into the snow, before growing bolder, its eyes shining with intelligence and intent. This fox isn't just a creature, it's the poet's thought, the arrival of inspiration creeping out of the subconscious mind. Hughes describes it with sensory precision, a sudden, sharp, hot stink of fox, and at that instant the animal disappears into the dark hole of the head. The idea has entered the poet's mind. And then comes the magical conclusion. The window is starless still, the clock ticks, the page is printed. Both of these lines have been asked in exam. The poet hasn't seen a star in the sky, but he has found something brighter, his own creative spark. The poem is, in essence, about the act of writing itself, how imagination awakens from silence, how a thought becomes a poem. The fox represents that moment of creation, mysterious, instinctive, fleeting, the living symbol of poetic inspiration. Ted Hughes once said that poetry must reconnect humans to the wild forces within and beyond themselves. The Thought Fox does exactly that. It turns a blank night into a living moment and shows that the poet's truest vision doesn't come from the stars, but from the dark, fertile forest of the mind.